"You won't make it home alive," he yelled on a Chicago street corner on Christmas night. The man across the street stopped walking. Clayton Jordan had just made the last threat of his life. For words hurled into frozen December air on Chicago's near West Side, they cut through the silence of Christmas night like a blade. Laura Davis felt her body go rigid 3 steps ahead of the man who was supposed to love her. The argument had started over nothing. A text message from a coworker. A smile Clayton decided lasted too long. By the time they left the holiday party, his anger had fermented into something darker, something that needed an audience even if he thought no one was watching. But someone was. Laura kept walking, shoulders hunched, her breath coming in shallow bursts that fogged the air. She knew this rhythm. Keep quiet. Keep moving. Let him burn through the rage. In their apartment, she'd learned to make herself small. In the car, she'd perfected silence. But never on a public street. Never with his voice echoing off brick buildings and empty storefronts. Never on Christmas. The neighborhood was nearly deserted. Holiday lights blinked from second-floor windows, cheerful and oblivious. A few parked cars lined the curb. The distant sound of traffic hummed blocks away. Clayton took that emptiness as permission. "You think embarrassing me just disappears?" His voice rose, sharp and ugly. "You think I forget? 3 years of this. 3 years of measuring every word, every glance, every decision against the unpredictable weather system of his moods. 3 years of watching her life contract, her friendships fade, her confidence erode like shoreline under relentless waves. The marketing coordinator who once pitched campaigns to boardrooms now rehearsed grocery lists to avoid buying the wrong brand of beer. Laura's hands were clenched so tight her nails cut crescents into her palms. She couldn't answer him. Answering only extended the storm. That's when Clayton decided the empty street needed to hear him. "You won't make it home alive." The threat cracked through the night, followed by a laugh, that horrible sound that was half amusement, half warning. A sound meant to terrify her while assuring himself he was in control. Laura flinched. Before we continue, hit the subscribe button so you don't lose this story in your feed and regret it. Comment your city below. Let's build a community that doesn't look away. Across the street, beneath a streetlight casting stark shadows on the snow-dusted sidewalk, a man in a perfectly tailored charcoal coat stopped mid-stride. She didn't notice him. Not yet. Her world had narrowed to the sound of Clayton's footsteps behind her and the terrible certainty that tonight would be worse than usual. That when they reached their apartment, the verbal assault would become something she'd have to hide under long sleeves and strategic makeup. But the man noticed everything. He stood motionless for 3 heartbeats, his expression unreadable in the amber glow of the streetlight. While other windows stayed dark, while other people turned up their televisions or checked their locks, this man turned toward the sound of the threat with the precision of someone who recognized exactly what he was hearing. Not just anger. Not just a couple fighting. Control. Ownership. Violence wrapped in the language of love. Lino Conti had heard this melody before in different keys, different languages, different cities. Men like Clayton spoke a universal dialect, loud enough to feel powerful, quiet enough to avoid consequences. They picked their moments carefully, empty streets, late nights, situations where witnesses could pretend they heard nothing. Clayton had miscalculated only one variable. Lino wasn't the type of man who pretended. He watched as Clayton stormed past Laura, shouldering ahead of her with aggressive body language designed to intimidate. Watched as Laura's pace slowed, her head dropping, her entire body language screaming exhaustion and fear. He saw the couple's dynamic in a glance. Predator and prey, abuser and victim, A relationship built on systematic destruction disguised as devotion. Clayton was big. Jim muscular. The kind of man who used his size as punctuation in arguments, who stood too close and loomed too long. He wore his physical presence like armor, confident that intimidation was the same as strength. He was about to learn the difference. Lino didn't rush, didn't call out. He simply began walking with deliberate purpose toward the couple, his expensive shoes clicking against concrete with the steady rhythm of inevitability. Laura heard the footsteps approaching and felt her stomach drop. Another man. Another variable. In her experience, other men either ignored what was happening or made it worse by confronting Clayton, which only meant she'd pay for it later. But when she risked a glance over her shoulder, the man walking toward them didn't look like he was coming to start a fight. He looked like he was coming to end one. Clayton noticed him too, his predator's instinct finally alerting him to a presence that didn't fit the pattern of averted eyes and turned backs. He spun around, squaring his shoulders, his hands flexing at his sides. "The hell do you want?" Clayton demanded, his voice still loud but now edged with something new. Not quite fear. Not yet. But uncertainty. Lino stopped 6 feet away. Close enough to be heard clearly. Far enough to be unthreatening. His hands stayed relaxed at his sides. His expression remained neutral, almost polite. "I heard what you said," Lino replied, his voice low and measured, carrying an accent that marked him as someone who'd learned English in Brooklyn's old neighborhoods. "And I wanted to make sure I heard it correctly." Clayton barked a laugh, but it sounded hollow. "This is between me and my girl. Keep walking." "Your girl." Lino repeated the phrase as if tasting it, finding it bitter. His dark eyes shifted to Laura for just a moment. "Is that what you are? His?" The question hung in the frozen air. Laura's heart hammered against her ribs. She recognized the danger in this moment. Not from this stranger, but from Clayton's wounded pride, from whatever would happen after this man walked away and she and Clayton were alone again. She'd learned long ago that the worst moments came after public embarrassments, after times when Clayton felt small. But something in the stranger's eyes stopped her from lying. Something in his steady, patient gaze that said he already knew the answer. That he'd asked not to gather information, but to give her a chance to say the truth out loud. Her voice cracked. She tried again. "I want to go home. Alone." The words felt like jumping off a cliff. Clayton's face twisted. "Baby, don't be dramatic. This guy doesn't know." "She said alone," Lino interrupted, his voice still quiet but now carrying an undertone of finality that made Clayton's mouth snap shut. For the first time in 3 years, Laura saw uncertainty flicker across Clayton's face. Saw him recognize that his usual tactics, the volume, the size, the intimidation, weren't working on this man in the expensive coat who watched him with the calm assessment of someone who'd seen every play in his playbook and wasn't impressed by any of them. "Listen," Clayton said, his tone shifting, trying for reasonable now. "This is a misunderstanding. We had a fight. Couples fight. It's none of your business." "You made it my business," Lino said simply, "when you threatened her life on a public street. On Christmas night, no less." He said it without judgment, just stating fact. That shows a particular kind of disrespect. Not just to her. To everyone within earshot. To the night itself. Something in the way he said it, the specific weight he gave to the word disrespect, sent a chill down Laura's spine that had nothing to do with the December cold. Clayton felt it too. She could see it in the way his bravado faltered, in the way his eyes darted around the empty street as if suddenly realizing that emptiness might not be in his favor after all. "Look, man, I don't know who you think you are." "I know exactly who I am," Lino said. "The question you should be asking yourself is, who do you think you are? Because right now, you're a man who threatened a woman's life, and I'm the one who heard it. And I promise you, Mr. Jordan." Clayton's eyes widened at the use of his name. "I don't forget voices, or threats, or the men who make them." The silence that followed pressed down like physical weight. Laura watched Clayton's face cycle through emotions: confusion, anger, fear, calculation. She'd never seen him afraid before. She'd been the only one who was ever afraid. It felt like watching a carefully constructed illusion crack and shatter. "Laura," Lino said, his voice gentling as he addressed her directly. "There's a coffee shop 2 blocks north. It's called Santino's. The owner is my cousin. Walk there now. Tell him Lino sent you. You'll be safe while I have a conversation with your boyfriend about the words he used tonight and what they cost." "She's not going anywhere without me," Clayton said, but his voice had lost its edge. Lino's expression didn't change. "Yes, she is. And you're going to let her. Because you're beginning to understand that everything you thought you knew about how tonight would end was wrong." Laura felt her legs trembling. Part of her wanted to refuse, to de-escalate, to smooth this over before Clayton's humiliation turned into her punishment later. But a bigger part, the part of her that had been silenced and compressed and nearly extinguished over 3 years, wanted to run. Wanted to take the opening this stranger had created and disappear into the night before the window closed. "Go," Lino said, still watching Clayton. "Now." Laura went. She walked quickly, then faster, then broke into a run she didn't know she was capable of anymore. Her breath came in gasps. Tears froze on her cheeks. Behind her, she heard Clayton's voice rise in protest, then fall silent at something Lino said that she couldn't make out. She didn't look back. She ran beneath the Christmas lights, past decorated windows and sleeping houses, toward a coffee shop she'd never heard of and a safety she'd forgotten existed. And on that frozen street corner, while the city slept and the year counted down its final days, Lino Conti stood face to face with a man who'd just learned that some words, once spoken into the wrong ears, change everything. Lino watched Laura disappear around the corner, her running footsteps fading into the December silence. Only when he was certain she was out of earshot did he return his full attention to Clayton Jordan. "You can't just," Clayton started. "I can," Lino said quietly. "And I did." In his 43 years, Lino Conti had learned that real power never announced itself. It didn't need volume or theatrics. It didn't require an audience or applause. Real power was a language spoken in glances, in silences, in the careful weight of a single word placed exactly where it needed to be. Men like Clayton mistook noise for strength. They confused fear with respect. They built their kingdoms on foundations of sand and wondered why they crumbled at the first real resistance. Lino had built his empire on stone. "You know what I think?" Clayton said, recovering some bravado now that Laura was gone. "I think you're some wannabe tough guy who watches too many movies. You don't scare me." Lino almost smiled. "Almost. I'm not trying to scare you, Mr. Jordan. Fear is temporary. Understanding is permanent. And you're going to understand something very clearly before this night ends." He pulled out his phone. Not quickly, not threateningly, just a simple gesture, and typed a brief message in Italian. The response came within seconds. Lino's expression didn't change as he read it, but he filed the information away with the methodical precision of someone who'd been collecting debts and settling accounts since he was 16 years old in Red Hook. "Here's what's going to happen," Lino continued, his tone conversational. "You're going to walk home. You're not going to follow Laura. You're not going to call her, text her, or attempt any contact whatsoever. Tomorrow morning, you'll find that certain aspects of your life have shifted. Consider it a natural consequence of poor choices." Clayton laughed, but it sounded forced. "You're insane. I'm calling the cops." "Go ahead." Lino's voice remained level. "Tell them a man intervened when you publicly threatened your girlfriend's life. See how sympathetic they are." The laugh died on Clayton's lips. "You made a mistake tonight," Lino said. "You thought the darkness gave you privacy. You thought emptiness gave you permission. You were wrong on both counts. There are always people watching, Mr. Jordan. The difference is whether they care enough to act." He buttoned his coat with the same elegant precision he'd used all evening. "I care. About order. About codes. About lines that shouldn't be crossed. You crossed one tonight, and now there are consequences. Not because I'm angry, anger is wasteful, but because men like you continue until someone makes them stop." Clayton's jaw tightened. "You don't know anything about me." "I know everything about you." Lino's voice carried absolute certainty. "I know you work at Brennan and Associates. Third-year associate, decent salary, mediocre performance reviews. I know you lease a BMW you can barely afford to impress people you don't actually like. I know your father taught you that control equals love and your mother never corrected him. I know you've done this before. Maybe not the public threats, but the private ones. The isolation. The systematic dismantling of someone else's world." Each fact landed like a hammer blow. Clayton's face had gone white. "How? It doesn't matter how." Lino checked his watch with deliberate casualness. "What matters is that I know. And now you know that I know. Which means the rules of your life just changed." He took a step back, creating distance without retreating. "Go home, Mr. Jordan. Think about the choices that brought you to this moment. And understand that Laura Davis is no longer your concern. She's mine." "Not romantically," he added, seeing Clayton's expression shift. "Practically. I've decided she deserves better than living in fear of a man who confuses possession with affection." "You can't just decide." "I already have." Lino's tone remained pleasant, almost friendly, which somehow made the words more chilling. "Sleep well, Mr. Jordan. What comes next happens whether you're rested or not." He walked away then, unhurried, his footsteps echoing in the empty street. He didn't look back. He didn't need to. He could feel Clayton standing there, frozen between impulses, probably still trying to decide if this was real or some elaborate bluff. By morning, Clayton would have his answer. Lino turned the corner and paused in the shadows, watching as Clayton finally started walking in the opposite direction, toward his apartment, away from wherever Laura had run. Good. Some people learned quickly. Others required more persuasive lessons. Time would tell which category Clayton fell into. He pulled out his phone again and made another call. "It's me," he said in Italian when the line connected. "I need information on someone. And I need it before sunrise." Laura sat in Santino's coffee shop with trembling hands wrapped around a cup of tea she couldn't taste. The owner, a kind-faced man in his 60s who'd asked no questions when she'd whispered Lino's name, had locked the door behind her and gestured to a corner booth. "You're safe here," he'd said simply. Stay as long as you need. But safety felt like a language she'd forgotten how to speak. Her phone buzzed. Clayton's name lit up the screen. Baby, where are you? That guy was crazy. Come home so we can talk. She stared at the message, her stomach twisting. This was the pattern. The explosion followed by the calm. The threat followed by the apology that wasn't really an apology, just a reframing that made her question what she'd actually heard, what had actually happened. You're overreacting. I would never hurt you. You know I love you. 3 years of this. 3 years of moments that felt too big to ignore, followed by explanations that made them seem too small to matter. The first time he'd grabbed her arm hard enough to bruise, he'd cried. Told her about his father, his childhood, his fear of losing her. She'd comforted him. Apologized for making him feel desperate enough to hurt her. The first time he'd screamed in her face, he'd bought her flowers the next day. Expensive ones. Told her she brought out passion in him that no one else ever had. She'd felt special. Chosen. The first time he'd isolated her from friends. Canceling plans, creating conflicts, making her choose between him and them. He'd explained it was because he valued their time together. Because other people didn't understand what they had. Slowly, methodically, he'd built a world where she was the problem and he was the solution. Where her instincts were wrong and his control was love. But tonight, a stranger had named it something different. Disrespect, Lino had called it. Not love. Not passion. Disrespect. Laura's phone buzzed again. I'm sorry if I scared you. You know how I get when I'm stressed. Just come home and we'll forget this happened. Forget. He always wanted her to forget. To erase the bad moments and keep only the good ones, building a highlight reel that bore no resemblance to the actual film of their relationship. But she couldn't forget the look on Lino's face when he'd said Clayton's full name. Couldn't forget the way Clayton's bravado had crumbled. Couldn't forget the feeling of running without being chased. Another message came through. Why aren't you answering? You're making this bigger than it needs to be. There it was. The shift. The blame. She was making it bigger. She was the one causing problems by not responding fast enough, not forgiving quickly enough, not forgetting completely enough. Laura typed a response, then deleted it. Typed another. Deleted that too. What could she say that wouldn't make things worse when she eventually had to go back? Because she would have to go back. Her name wasn't on the lease. Her savings account had $247 in it. Money she'd squirreled away from grocery budgets and birthday checks. She worked at his firm. Lived in his apartment. Drove his car when he allowed it. He'd made sure of that. Fine. Be childish. But you're still coming home eventually. The certainty in that message made her chest tighten. He was right. Where else could she go? Her parents lived 3 states away and believed Clayton was wonderful because that's the version of himself he showed them. Her friends had stopped calling after enough cancelled plans and awkward explanations. She had nowhere. She was no one without him. Or at least, that's what 3 years had taught her to believe. Her phone buzzed one more time. I have a meeting in the morning. Let's just talk after work tomorrow. Cool down. I love you. Laura read the message 3 times. Felt the familiar pull toward compliance, toward making things easier, toward being the person who smoothed over conflicts instead of creating them. But this time, something was different. This time, the word disrespect echoed louder than his I love you. She turned off her phone and watched the screen go dark, wondering if a stranger's intervention would change anything at all, or if tomorrow she'd wake up and slip back into the role she'd been playing for so long she'd forgotten it was a performance. Across the city, Clayton was learning that some performances end whether the actor is ready or not. Clayton woke up Tuesday morning to an email that made his blood run cold. Subject: Performance Review Meeting, 9 a.m., attendance mandatory. He'd just had his annual review 3 months ago. Scored satisfactory across the board. This wasn't scheduled. This wasn't normal. His hands shook as he knotted his tie, twice, because the first attempt looked sloppy. The apartment felt too quiet without Laura's nervous energy filling the space. She still hadn't come home. Hadn't answered his calls. 24 hours of silence that gnawed at him like something with teeth. The meeting lasted 11 minutes. "We're restructuring," his supervisor said, not quite meeting his eyes. "Your position is being eliminated. We're offering 2 weeks severance and a neutral reference." Eliminated. Clayton's voice cracked. "I've been here 3 years. My billings are solid. This doesn't make. The decision is final. HR will handle the details. I'm sorry, Clayton." But he didn't look sorry. He looked uncomfortable. Like he was following orders he didn't quite understand but knew better than to question. Clayton cleaned out his desk in a fog. His co-workers avoided eye contact. The HR rep processed his termination with practiced efficiency. By 10:30, he was standing on the sidewalk with a cardboard box and no explanation that made sense. His phone buzzed. A text from his landlord. "Need to discuss lease renewal. Call me today." Lease renewal? It wasn't due for 4 months. He called. Got voicemail. Called again an hour later from a coffee shop where the barista looked at him with something like pity when his card declined. His account showed insufficient funds despite the direct deposit that should have hit Friday. His bank's customer service line put him on hold for 40 minutes before disconnecting. By Wednesday, 3 friends had stopped returning his texts. His gym membership was mysteriously cancelled. His credit card showed charges he didn't recognize, then locked for suspicious activity he couldn't get anyone to explain. Thursday morning, his landlord finally called back. "Look, Clayton, I don't want drama. The building owner wants you out. I'm required to give 30 days notice, but if you're gone by next week, I'll return your deposit." "Why? I've never been late on rent. Never caused problems." The landlord hesitated. "I was told there were concerns about your character, about incidents. I don't know the details and I don't want to. Just make this easy, okay?" Clayton's apartment felt like it was shrinking. He paced between rooms, his mind racing through possibilities. This wasn't coincidence. Couldn't be. Someone was doing this. Someone with reach. With influence. Someone who knew his name before he'd given it. The man in the tailored coat materialized in his memory like a ghost solidifying. The way he'd stood under that streetlight, calm and certain. The way he'd said Clayton's full name, his employer, details he shouldn't have known. "Laura Davis is no longer your concern. She's mine." Clayton's hands clenched into fists. That guy. That smug bastard who'd interfered in something that wasn't his business. He had to be connected. Had to have resources. Money. Power. But what kind of power made someone's entire life disintegrate in 72 hours? He grabbed his laptop, searching for answers. Tried to find the man's face in his memory clearly enough to describe. Tall. Dark hair. Expensive suit. Italian accent. The name had been Something Italian. Mario? Marco? Lino. The name surfaced like something dredged from deep water. Lino Conti. Clayton typed it into Google with shaking hands. The results loaded slowly, his cheap coffee shop Wi-Fi crawling. What he found made his mouth go dry. Nothing. Almost nothing. A few business registrations. A mention in an archived article about Brooklyn real estate from 2019. A photo from a charity gala in 2021 showing a man who might have been him standing in the background, face partially obscured. The absence of information was somehow worse than finding evidence. Normal people left digital footprints. This man was a ghost. Clayton slammed his laptop shut, drawing stares from nearby customers. His breath came too fast. His shirt collar felt too tight. He'd thought Laura was overreacting that night. Thought she was being dramatic when she'd run. But maybe she'd understood something he hadn't. Maybe she'd recognized that the man who'd stopped on that street corner wasn't someone you ran from. He was someone you didn't run from fast enough. Clayton's phone buzzed one more time, an unknown number, and when he saw the message, he finally understood exactly how much trouble he was in. The message was simple. Villa Constanza. 8 p.m. tonight. Come alone. This is not a request. Elsie. Clayton stared at his phone screen, heart hammering against his ribs. He could ignore it. Should ignore it. Call the police, file a harassment report, do something rational. But rational people didn't lose their jobs, apartments, and bank accounts in 72 hours for no reason. Rational people didn't cross men who could erase them with a phone call. Villa Constanza sat in Manhattan's Tribeca district, an unmarked building that looked like a renovated warehouse from the outside. No sign. No visible entrance from the street. Just a black door with a brass intercom and a security camera that tracked Clayton's approach with mechanical precision. He pressed the button. Static crackled. Name, a voice said. Clayton Jordan. I have a meeting. The door clicked open without another word. Inside, the contrast was staggering. Marble floors. Dark wood paneling. Original art that probably cost more than Clayton had earned in his entire life. A hostess in an elegant black dress gestured toward a hallway without speaking. The dining room was intimate. 6 tables, all empty except one. Lino Conti sat alone at a corner table, reading something on a tablet. He looked exactly as Clayton remembered. Tailored suit, dark hair perfectly styled, an aura of controlled power that filled the space without effort. He glanced up as Clayton approached, his expression neutral. Sit, Lino said. Not unkindly. Just a statement of fact. Clayton sat. His legs felt unsteady. A waiter materialized with 2 glasses of wine. Expensive wine, judging by the bottle. Clayton didn't touch his. You're wondering why you're here, Lino said, setting aside his tablet. And more importantly, you're wondering how to make what's happening to you stop. Clayton's jaw tightened. You're destroying my life. No. Lino's voice remained calm. I'm revealing what your life actually is when you can't hide behind intimidation and control. The difference is significant. I don't even know you. What gives you the right? You made a threat. Lino interrupted gently. A death threat. Against a woman on a public street. On Christmas night. In front of me. He paused, letting each word settle. That gives me every right. Couples fight. It's not. There are rules, Mr. Jordan. Lino leaned forward slightly. Not laws. Laws are for courts and lawyers and people who need written permission to know right from wrong. I'm talking about rules. The kind that existed before governments, before badges, before civilization pretended it had tamed human nature. Clayton's mouth went dry. One of those rules is simple, Lino continued. You don't threaten women. You don't abuse power. You don't build yourself up by tearing someone else down. And you especially don't do it loudly, publicly, stupidly, assuming no one important is watching. He took a sip of wine, completely relaxed. I was watching. I heard every word. And in my world, that means you've broken a rule that carries consequences. Not legal consequences. Real ones. This is insane, Clayton said, but his voice lacked conviction. You can't just decide. I already have. Lino's eyes held his. Your job. Your apartment. Your credit. Your reputation. I could take more if I wanted. Much more. But I'm not interested in destruction for its own sake. I'm interested in education. He set down his glass. You're here because I want you to understand something clearly. Laura Davis is not your property. She was never your property. And the fear you built your relationship on? That currency is worthless now. You spent it all on one threat, and the wrong person collected the debt. Clayton felt cold sweat dripping down his spine. What do you want from me? Nothing you can give. Lino's smile was brief, humorless. I want you to disappear from Laura's life. Completely. Permanently. No contact. No reconciliation attempts. No showing up where she works or lives. You become a ghost to her. A bad memory that fades. And if I don't? Lino's expression didn't change, but something in the air shifted. Became heavier. Then you'll learn that what I've taken from you so far was mercy, not punishment. And Mr. Jordan, you really don't want to learn that lesson. The silence stretched between them like a live wire. Who are you? Clayton whispered. Lino stood, buttoning his jacket with that same elegant precision. I'm the man who heard you. That's all you need to know. He placed a business card on the table. No name, just a phone number, and walked toward the exit, then paused. One more thing. Laura doesn't know about this meeting. She doesn't know what's happened to you or why. And that's how it stays. She needs to believe she's free because she chose freedom, not because someone chose it for her. Do you understand? Clayton nodded numbly. Good. Lino's voice softened almost imperceptibly. Go rebuild somewhere else, Mr. Jordan. Become someone better. Or don't. But do it far away from her. He left without another word, and Clayton sat alone in the elegant room, finally understanding that he'd never been the dangerous one in his relationship. He'd just been loud enough to convince himself he was, until someone truly dangerous had decided otherwise. Laura had been staying at her co-worker Monica's apartment for 5 days when the envelope arrived. Monica handed it to her over morning coffee, eyebrows raised. This was slipped under my door. No postage. No return address. Just your name. Inside was a single sheet of expensive paper with 3 lines written in precise handwriting. Clayton Jordan will not contact you again. This is guaranteed. What you do with your freedom is your choice. Elsie. Laura's hands trembled. She read it twice, 3 times, trying to decode meaning between the words. Who's Elsie? Monica asked. A man who... Laura paused, unsure how to explain. A man who stopped something bad from happening. The note felt like permission and warning simultaneously. Freedom offered but not imposed. A door opened but not pushed through. Her phone sat silent on Monica's coffee table. Clayton hadn't called in 4 days. Hadn't texted. Hadn't shown up at the office where she still worked, though she'd been taking sick days, too afraid to face him. The silence felt wrong. Unnatural. In 3 years, Clayton had never gone more than 6 hours without contacting her. His absence was louder than his presence had ever been. "What are you going to do?" Monica asked gently. Laura stared at the note. "I don't know." But that was a lie. She knew exactly what she should do. What she'd known for months, maybe years. The man who'd intervened that night, Lino, had simply removed the obstacles she'd been using as excuses. No job loss, because she worked there first and could stay. No financial crisis, because Monica had offered her couch rent-free. No physical danger, because someone had apparently guaranteed it. All that remained was her own decision. That afternoon, she went to the apartment she'd shared with Clayton. Her key still worked. She half expected him to be there, waiting, ready to explain everything away with the charisma that had hooked her 3 years ago. The apartment was empty. Not just vacant, empty. His clothes were gone. His furniture removed. Only her belongings remained, neatly packed in boxes labeled in handwriting she didn't recognize. A separate envelope sat on the kitchen counter with her name on it. Inside, a cashier's check for $3,000 and a brief note in Clayton's handwriting. "I'm sorry. You deserve better. I'm leaving the city. The lease is paid through the end of next month. After that, it's yours if you want it. See." Laura sank onto the bare floor, check trembling in her hands. This wasn't how abusive relationships ended. There was supposed to be begging, manipulation, final attempts at control. There were supposed to be cycles, explosion, honeymoon, tension building. Not silence. Not clean breaks. Not cashier's checks and apologies that almost sounded real. She pulled out her phone and typed a number she'd found on the business card tucked in the first envelope. "This is Laura Davis. I need to understand what you did." The response came within minutes. "I did very little. I simply ensured he understood that his behavior had consequences. The rest was his choice. As this is yours." She typed back, "Did you hurt him?" "No. I hurt his pride. Sometimes that's more effective." Laura sat in the empty apartment, her apartment now if she wanted it, and felt something shift inside her chest. Not gratitude exactly. Not relief. Something harder to name. Clarity, maybe. For 3 years, she'd told herself she stayed because leaving was complicated. Because she had nowhere to go. Because Clayton needed her. Because love meant working through hard things. But sitting in this emptiness, she finally admitted the truth. She'd stayed because leaving required believing she deserved better, and Clayton had spent 3 years convincing her she didn't. A stranger had seen her worth in a single moment on a frozen street. Now she had to decide if she believed it too. She typed one more message. "Thank you. I'm choosing to stay gone." The response was immediate. "Good. That's the only choice that matters." Laura deleted the thread, pocketed the check, and walked out of the apartment that had been her prison, leaving the keys on the counter for a landlord to collect. She didn't know where she'd go next, but for the first time in 3 years, the uncertainty felt like possibility instead of terror. Across the city, Lino Conti received confirmation that Laura Davis had made her choice, and quietly closed a file he'd never planned to open in the first place. though something told him this wouldn't be the last time their paths would cross. 2 weeks after Laura walked out of the empty apartment, a package arrived at Monica's building. No return address. Just Laura's name written in Clayton's distinctive handwriting, the same careful script he'd used on birthday cards and apology notes, words meant to rebuild what his actions had destroyed. Monica brought it up from the lobby with obvious concern. "You don't have to open it." But Laura did. Not because she wanted to, but because she needed to know if the hold was finally broken. Inside was a shoebox. No explosives, no threats, just objects carefully arranged like evidence in a trial, a dried flower from their first date, a photo booth strip from a carnival 2 summers ago, both of them laughing, a ticket stub from a concert, a handwritten letter on expensive stationery. Laura unfolded it with steady hands. "Laura, I know I'm not supposed to contact you. I know I promised to disappear. But I can't leave without you understanding that I never meant to hurt you. Everything I did came from loving you too much, from being terrified of losing you. I'm in Philadelphia now. Starting over. Seeing a therapist. Working on myself. Becoming the man you deserved from the beginning. I'm not asking you to come back. I'm just asking you to know that what we had was real. That I loved you. That I'm sorry. If you ever want to talk, I'm here. Just one conversation. Just to hear your voice one more time. I'll wait as long as it takes. Clayton." Laura read it twice. Felt the familiar pull of his words, the way he'd always been able to make his pain sound more important than hers. The subtle implication that her silence was cruelty. That he deserved one more chance, one more conversation, one more opportunity to explain. 3 years ago, this letter would have worked. She would have called. Would have believed that therapy and distance had changed him. Would have convinced herself that she owed him at least a conversation after everything they'd shared. But that was before a stranger had shown her what control actually looked like when it came from strength instead of fear. Monica watched her carefully. "What are you going to do?" Laura walked to the kitchen, letter in hand. She held it over Monica's sink and pulled out a lighter. "Nothing," she said, and set it on fire. The paper caught quickly, edges curling black, Clayton's careful handwriting disappearing into ash. She watched it burn completely, then washed the remains down the drain. "That's it?" Monica asked. "That's it?" No phone call. No closure conversation. No explanation of why she wouldn't respond. Silence was the only answer that couldn't be negotiated, manipulated, or twisted into something else. She threw the shoebox into the trash without examining the other contents. The memories he'd curated so carefully meant nothing compared to the ones he'd chosen not to include. The bruises, the isolation, the systematic destruction of her confidence. Her phone sat on the counter. She could text him. Could tell him she got the package. Could offer the closure he was clearly desperate for. Instead, she blocked his number. Blocked his email. Blocked every possible pathway he could use to reach her. Then she called the landlord of the apartment Clayton had abandoned and signed the lease in her name only. That night, Monica found her on the couch, staring at nothing. "You okay?" Laura thought about it. Really thought. "I think I finally am." For the first time in 3 years, she felt the absence of fear. Not just the absence of Clayton, but the absence of the weight he'd placed on her chest, the voice in her head that sounded like his criticism, the constant calculation of how her actions would affect his mood. In Philadelphia, Clayton checked his phone for the 100th time that day. No response. No text. No call. He'd been so certain the letter would work. That the memories would remind her of the good times. That his vulnerability would trigger her compassion. That she'd reach out just once, and that once would be enough to start rebuilding the connection. But as hours turned to days, he finally understood what the man in the tailored coat had known from the beginning. Some relationships don't end with arguments or explanations. They end with silence. And silence, Clayton was learning, was the one thing his voice had never been loud enough to drown out. Across the city, Lino Conti received a brief message from an associate confirming that Clayton Jordan had made no further attempts at contact, and he allowed himself a moment of satisfaction before moving on to more pressing matters. Though one name remained filed away in his memory, just in case the lesson hadn't taken as permanently as it appeared. 6 weeks after Christmas night, Laura walked down the same stretch of near West Side pavement where her life had split into before and after. She didn't plan it. Her therapist's office was 3 blocks over, and she'd chosen to walk instead of taking the bus. The cold February air bit at her cheeks, but not cruelly. Just honestly. The streetlights looked different now. Less like prison spotlights, more like what they actually were. Just lights doing their job, illuminating nothing more sinister than empty sidewalks and parked cars. She stopped beneath the one where it had happened. Where Clayton had yelled words he couldn't take back. Where a stranger had stopped walking and changed the trajectory of everything. Laura closed her eyes and tried to remember the fear that had paralyzed her that night. The shallow breathing. The clenched fists. The certainty that nothing would ever change because change required power she didn't have. The memory was there, but distant. Like watching someone else's story through frosted glass. She'd signed the lease on her apartment 3 days ago. Started therapy 2 weeks before that. Reconnected with friends who'd stopped calling after Clayton had made every interaction exhausting. She'd even pulled her old sketchbooks from storage, drawings and plans from before she'd learned to make herself smaller. None of it felt like victory. It felt like waking up from a long illness and realizing how much time had passed while she'd been sick. Funny how fast things can change, she said quietly to the empty street. From across the intersection, partially obscured by the shadow of a building entrance, Lino Conti watched her standing there. He'd been keeping loose track. Not surveillance. He wasn't interested in controlling her choices, only in ensuring Clayton honored his. But tonight was different. Tonight was closure. He watched as Laura lifted her chin slightly, squared her shoulders, and continued walking. Not hurrying. Not looking over her shoulder. Just walking like someone who belonged on that street as much as anyone else. The transformation was subtle but complete. The woman who'd flinched at raised voices now moved through the world with quiet certainty. Not fearless. Fear was human and appropriate. But no longer defined by it. Lino had seen this before. The moment when victims stopped thinking of themselves that way. When they reclaimed not just their physical space but the mental territory that abuse had occupied. It couldn't be given to them. Could only be taken back through choice and time. He'd simply removed the obstacles. The rest had been her work. Laura reached the corner and turned toward her new apartment. Her name on the lease, her furniture arranged how she wanted it, her life rebuilt on foundations she'd chosen. She didn't see the man in the tailored coat watching from the shadows. Didn't know he'd been ensuring her safety from a distance. Didn't realize that the guarantee he'd written on expensive paper was backed by the kind of power that operated in silence. And that was exactly as it should be. Lino turned away, satisfied. The balance had been restored. A man who'd built his identity on control had learned that real power was something else entirely. A woman who'd forgotten her worth had remembered it. His phone buzzed, business requiring his attention elsewhere in the city, the kind of business that kept his world running with the precision of a Swiss watch. He walked toward his car parked 3 blocks away, his footsteps echoing in the February quiet. The incident was closed. Filed away. Complete. Laura Davis would rebuild her life without ever knowing the full extent of what had happened behind the scenes. Without knowing that phone calls in Italian had dismantled a man's world. Without knowing that her freedom had been guaranteed by someone who believed in rules older than laws. And that ignorance was its own kind of freedom. She didn't owe him gratitude. Didn't owe him anything. She'd saved herself the moment she'd said no on a frozen street and meant it. He'd just made sure the world heard her. As Lino's car pulled away from the curb, Laura unlocked her apartment door miles away and stepped into warmth and silence. The good kind of silence, the kind that felt like peace instead of danger. Unaware that the man who'd intervened in her darkest moment had just confirmed she no longer needed intervening, and had quietly closed a chapter that neither of them would speak of again, though both would remember for very different reasons. Spring arrived in New York with the kind of warmth that makes people forget winter ever happened. Laura stood in a small gallery in Brooklyn, her artwork hanging on white walls under carefully positioned lights. Not a major showing. Just a group exhibition for emerging artists, but it was hers. Her name on the placard. Her vision on canvas. Her voice, finally, speaking at full volume. A woman approached, wine glass in hand. These are stunning. The use of shadow and light, it's like you're painting fear and freedom at the same time. Laura smiled. That's exactly what they are. She'd titled the series Streetlight Confessions. 6 paintings exploring the space between captivity and liberation. Critics would call them powerful. She just called them honest. Her phone buzzed. A text from Monica, so proud of you. Drinks after? Laura typed back, absolutely. She looked around the gallery, at strangers admiring her work, at friends who'd shown up to support her, at a life that finally felt like it belonged to her. 6 months ago, this moment would have been impossible. Not because she lacked talent, but because she'd lacked permission to believe in it. No one had rescued her from that. She'd walked out herself. Someone had just made sure the door stayed open long enough for her to reach it. Across the city, in an office with no nameplate and no listed phone number, Lino Conti reviewed reports that had nothing to do with Laura Davis or Clayton Jordan. Shipping manifests. Real estate contracts. Arrangements that required the kind of precision that kept his world balanced on the knife's edge between order and chaos. The incident from Christmas night existed now only in a closed file, memorable only because it had required so little actual intervention. Most problems solved themselves once the right pressure was applied to the right point. His assistant knocked, bringing coffee and the evening schedule. The Castellano meeting at 8, she reminded him. And you have that charity gala next week. They're requesting a donation. Double last year's amount, Lino said without looking up. Keep my name off the program. Power, he'd learned long ago, wasn't about recognition. It was about results. About maintaining the kind of order that let people like Laura Davis rebuild their lives while people like Clayton Jordan learned expensive lessons about respect. The world didn't applaud that kind of justice. The newspapers didn't write about it. No awards were given for dismantling abusers with phone calls instead of violence. But it worked. Quietly. Completely. Permanently. And that was enough. In Philadelphia, Clayton Jordan sat in a studio apartment barely large enough for his furniture, scrolling through job postings he was overqualified for but couldn't get interviews for. His LinkedIn profile had gone dark. His professional network had evaporated. His attempts to rebuild had met walls he couldn't see but could definitely feel. He'd stopped trying to contact Laura 3 months ago. Stopped trying to explain or justify or rationalize. The silence from her end had been more final than any argument could have been. Some nights, he still wondered about the man in the tailored coat. Who he was. What he'd done. How he'd managed to dismantle an entire life with such surgical precision. But mostly, Clayton tried not to think about it at all. Because thinking about it meant acknowledging that he'd built his identity on sand, and one stranger had revealed the foundation's weakness with a single question. Is that what you are? His. The answer had always been no. He just hadn't bothered to listen until someone made him. Laura left the gallery at midnight, exhausted and exhilarated. She walked home alone through Brooklyn streets, keys in hand out of habit rather than fear, and felt the weight of her phone in her pocket. No blocked numbers, no unanswered messages, no dread of seeing certain names on the screen. Just silence. The good kind. The kind that felt like peace. She thought briefly about the stranger who'd intervened. Wondered if he knew she'd rebuilt. If he cared. If men like him kept score or simply moved on to the next imbalance requiring correction. She'd never know. And that was fine. Some debts couldn't be repaid because they were never meant to be. As Laura unlocked her apartment and stepped into the space she'd claimed as truly hers, and as Lino closed his office for the night and returned to a world where power operated in whispers rather than shouts, and as Clayton stared at his ceiling in Philadelphia accepting a permanent exile from a life he'd burned down himself, the city continued its endless rhythm, indifferent to individual stories, hosting millions of moments that mattered only to those living them. But in the space between those moments, a truth persisted. Loud men threaten. Powerful men decide. And sometimes, the most important decisions are the ones no one ever hears about. The quiet dismantling of cruelty, the silent restoration of balance, the justice delivered without applause in the darkness between streetlights where predators learn too late that someone was always watching, always listening, always ready to remind them that real power doesn't announce itself until the moment it's far too late to run. Some threats echo louder than others. Some men mistake silence for weakness. And some nights, the wrong person is listening. Laura walked away free. Clayton learned respect the hard way. Lino? He's already forgotten both their names. That's how real power works. If someone you know is living Laura's story, send them this. Silent. If you've ever been Clayton, do better. Starting now. If you want more stories where justice doesn't wait for permission, hit subscribe. You won't want to miss it.